Midnight shift employees of Reddit, what's the creepiest experience you've had during your nighttime shift? I work on a cargo ship, and the night shift take turns doing fire control rounds of every deck and the engine room. Maybe a month back, I was in the middle of one of these rounds. I was on one of the lower decks where we load long-haul trucks like sardines. So tight you have to walk sideways between them. I'm shuffling along between these trucks and trailers with music in my ears. I'm looking at the temp on some of the freezer trailers to make sure it's all good. And it is, as far as I can tell. After just turning away from a trailer, I swear, I hear a weak voice just behind me. "Logan," it says. I quickly pop an earplug out and turn around, but there is no one there. I stand still for a couple of seconds and listen. The row of trucks I'm standing in is maybe 12 trucks long and 7 wide? 7. Due to the darkness, I can maybe see for 2 trucks down the row to either side of me. That's weird, I think. I should be the only one down here. I grab my radio in my breast pocket and call the bridge. "Bridge, this is Logan on deck 3. "Yes, Logan. Bridge here." "Did you guys call me just now?" "No, why?" "No reason," I say and end the call. Now I'm starting to calm down a little and start moving again. Right when I go to put my music on, there it is again. Logan. Now I'm really freaked out. Last time I wasn't 100% sure because of the music in my ears, but now I really heard it. Someone said my name right behind my back. I'm frozen in place. I can't move. I'm pressed shoulder to shoulder between 2 trucks. I'm cold from fear all over. It feels like someone is standing right behind me in the dark, looking at me. Like if I turn around, I will see a man's shape in the row behind me. I hear it again. "Logan," the voice says. "Logan." Finally, after what feels like an hour. I turn my head and look behind me. Darkness. Nothing. What I do see, however, is the faint light of my phone in my back pocket. It is currently in an open call to my father. Call time is about 5 minutes, and now I can clearly hear my father on the other end. "Logan," he says, "why are you calling in the middle of the night for?" Story 2. I used to be a crew chief at IHOP during the night shift, but there wasn't a crew. It was just me and one cook. One night a man came in and seemed so friendly and insightful. He was telling me about his time as a music producer in LA. He was so polite with me throughout our conversation, something I can't stress enough. A few more customers came in, and as I took care of their orders, the man I spoke to started talking to himself and laughing. Then the laughter got louder and almost maniacal. He then went on a huge rant about the world, but he shouted in different pitches throughout the rant, even disturbingly changing his facial expressions. He scared off 2 of the other patrons, and I had to call the cops. When they showed up, his whole demeanor went back to normal, and he politely walked out with the police, but looked back at me and winked. I was scared the whole night. I only had to call the cops because I asked him multiple times to settle down because he was legit scaring the other customers, and there goes my hustle. The man was indeed employed with Sony. He handed me a business card with his hotel written on the back. I really enjoyed our conversation, and it just added to my shock when I saw him short circuit and flip pancakes. Story 3. Security guard here. For about 2 weeks during Christmas time, our facility shuts down. The only ones present are the guards. We work long, boring shifts, and all of the lights except for the office areas are shut off. This was about 10 p.m. one of those nights. It's already surreal being alone in a huge facility in the middle of nowhere, at least a mile by car from the next nearest human. I'm walking around, no flashlight because I'm a git. And like straight out of a horror movie, I see a person-like shadow move between 2 tall shelves. I start jogging down there, trying to be quiet so I can just observe if it's a person or my mind playing tricks. I track this person for about 10 minutes, only getting brief glimpses of shadows letting me know where they are, until I took a different route and finally saw the shadow of a person approaching me. I got out my light on my phone and stupidly yelled, "Security! Who there?" It was our maintenance coordinator, Mark. His face was really red and he looked like he'd been crying. I was like, "Oh crap, hey man, sorry, everything okay?" He kind of mumbled, "Yeah, it's all right. I have some stuff to do in my office," and walked off. I heard later he and his wife got into a huge fight around that time and she'd left him and went to stay with her parents. This incident was only a few days before Christmas too. I never mentioned it to him when everyone came back from holiday, but I figure he just wanted to come somewhere safe and get his mind off of stuff. And I still feel bad for probably scaring the crap out of him on a really bad night. Story 4. When I was in the oil field, I had to take a piss. So I walked to the edge of my work site and let it rip. Halfway through a mountain lion walked right by me, like within 10 feet. That was scary. Another time I'm standing on the edge of the site and shining my flashlight into the empty field and I see all these little green emeralds. There's thousands of them all over the field, and I have no idea what they are. I walk out into the field about 30 yards or so and lean in on one of them. Yep, they were all spiders. Story 5. I was a night shift security guard at a cemetery, and I worked alone. I was doing my rounds one night, and I noticed the metal gate to one of the old tunnels was slightly ajar. Then I heard voices. Now these old tunnels were used to store high-value equipment. And policy was that if I found a door unlocked, I was to enter and secure the area, and only if I found something amiss to call the police. To be fair, We found doors and gates left unlocked all the time. And of course, I have no idea where the light switch is, and all the lights are off, so I have to go creeping through these dark-ass tunnels with a flashlight, having no idea what I'm about to find. Turns out one of the maintenance guys left a radio on and forgot to lock the gate. Story 6. I used to work a late shift in a warehouse putting together online orders. We would leave the dock doors up because it got hot in the warehouse. Normally on slow days, we just hung out on the loading dock smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee. Behind our warehouse was a small patch of woods, maybe like 2 acres. And just past the wooded area is a super ghetto apartment complex. I should mention, quite regularly, we'd smoke substances, and this was one of those times. My coworker and I are sitting on the loading dock staring at the woods. Lo and behold, some addict comes stumbling out the woods in tightly whites. I, being pretty baked at this point, look to my coworker and ask him, "Hey, I'm not seeing crap, right? A dude just came out the woods in undies, right?" He calmly replies, "Yup, that's real." Then the addict starts walking around in circles and he's yelling, "You! Where the heck are you?" I yell out to the addict and ask him who the heck is he yelling at. He keeps saying he can't find his homie. He kept yelling and all of a sudden I hear this rustling in the woods. And I crap you not, a damn horse comes out the damn woods. The thing was all raggedy, like it had mange, and the damn horse looked like it was high. The junkie looks at the horse and says, "There you are, dude." Anyways, I look at my coworker and ask if the horse is real and he just nods, and we both just watch this addict guy in underwear and a junkie horse wander off into the night. Also, I should probably say I don't live anywhere remotely rural. It's a pretty big city and there aren't like farms or anything close by, so it's pretty rare to see a horse unless a cop is on it. Story 7. Night shift at a hospital I used to work at. Get report at beginning of shift. Patient is nonverbal due to dementia. Literally, the report I get is they have such advanced dementia that they haven't spoken an intelligible word in several years, just mostly grunting and moaning. This hospital was old, very old. Tiny rooms, kind of a dark place at night. I'm basically trying to get this person's heart rhythm under control for most of my 12 hours night shift. It's 2:30 a.m. I've been running a cardiac drip on this person for hours, trying to get things under control. Then all of a sudden, I see a lethal rhythm on the monitor, Vatach, briefly, and go into the room to check on the patient. Look at monitor again. The rhythm is now totally normal. The power in the entire building flickers very briefly, and the patient says in perfect clear English, "I was born in 1895, I need to go home," and repeats it several times to my absolute horror. I go get another nurse, and patient is now muttering unintelligible sounds again, as they had been when I assessed at beginning of shift. Crap you not. This really happened. I don't believe in ghosts, but this incident made me wonder for several months after. Who knows? Maybe it was just a coincidence in the multiple meds they were on. Story 8. The woman who came into the store, smallish town convenience store, rambling about how the government had swapped out her kids for imposters and how she needed to find a way to get rid of them. Luckily, some of the police in town knew me, and they knew who I was talking about when I called. Last, I heard a family member adopted the kids, and the woman was getting help. Story 9. I'm a cab driver in a small mountain town. I've seen a plainclothes police officer hit with a skateboard by a young teen having a psychotic episode. He passed from his injuries later. I've seen a cougar running up the main street, hissing at every movement. I've seen a man get into my cab wearing a huge unsheathed machete strapped to his leg and ramble about in a deranged fashion until he told me to pull over and he ran away. All these things are not necessarily scary as the occult-ish type things you hear about night shift, but they were still scary. I'm a female cab driver. Story 10. Used work in audit. Lots of late nights, 2 a.m. or later, working overnight was not uncommon. Our office tower was the first true skyscar built in that city and was the tallest building around for many years. Naturally, it became a popular spot for death for many years. It was haunted AF. During the day when office workers were everywhere, it was pretty much normal. Late at night, after 11 or so, the building would feel very different. The way that office worked is that lowly audit drones like us didn't have assigned desks, but had 3 rows of long tables for floating stations. We faced each other with a divider lengthwise across the middle of the tables, so 6 rows of seating. Teams often worked late, and even after midnight, it was common for 1 or 2 teams to be in the office. For some strange reason, even if we started the evening spread out across all the rows, we would end up clustered together on the last 2 rows by the end. The seniors experienced plenty of stuff, and some became pretty numb to it. Seniors would insist we all leave together, accompany each other to the toilets, even the guys, and that no one was to work late alone. One time it was only my team of 4 working late, past 1 a.m. at that point. We're busy typing away at our laptops, flipping through papers, occasionally leaning back in our chairs to ask a question. We started hearing typing coming from a different corner of the office. It started when we started and stopped when we stopped. Spooked, the senior said to ignore it and quickly finish up. We hurriedly pick up the pace and do our best to ignore the phantom typing. After that, we start to hear rustling paper and small thumps getting louder, like files, documents being dropped on a table. We're getting freaked out now. The office seems dark even though it's brightly lit, and there's this terrible feeling in the air. Without saying a word, we start packing our stuff because we're not paid enough for this. Suddenly, the lights above the rows in front of us flicker and we all gasp in fear. We're staring wide-eyed at the front rows when one of the office chairs turns and rolls from pretty much the left side to the right side of the office. We bolt out of the office. Forget the laptops and papers, we just grabbed our phones, keys, and etc., and we ran out of there. Didn't even turn off the lights. And then we were back in the office the next morning like nothing happened. I made it a point to leave by midnight after that. I'd rather work on stuff on my bed than stay in the office. Story 11. I was 3 months into being a driver graveyard shift for a well-known company. Anyways, never got an uneasy feeling at this job site, warehouse ever. But this one night about 2 a.m. felt off. I could shake it. It was like I was being watched. But I was the only one at the warehouse, and we do have security that would watch us on CCTV. The security isn't on site. Literally a warehouse that we keep products in and ship back out. Anyways, back to me feeling weird about 2 a.m. as I was alone, picking up more items to run back out to stores. I kept shaking this feeling off. I'd pause, look around the parking lot outside and the other surrounding warehouses. There was not a single sound, just crickets and wind. I felt off. I decided to roll down the warehouse doors and secure my truck and step inside to take a leak. I was in the bathroom inside and actually ended up having to poop when my phone alerts me. It's security. I ignore the first 3 calls. 4th call I pick up. Mr. Stem Shovel, we've detected movement at the warehouse inside. Are you secure? Where is your current position? I tell them I'm not in the warehouse and doors are all secure. They make note. The alarm system is active and doors outside the warehouse are closed, etc. I'm wrapping up pooping and I get the goosebumps. They said they would check the cameras and call me back to stay put. I finish up and look out through the doors to the warehouse. It's empty besides product. Doors are definitely secured, nothing's unlocked. You couldn't get and trust me. They call back. Mr. Steam Shovel, we've detected movement again. The sensors are saying there's movement in the warehouse. Are you currently inside the warehouse? I'm literally looking outside the warehouse at this point. Nothing is there. I report back, nothing is there. Again, I have the chills. Anyways, throat is lumpy. Talking on the phone with security, I decided to leave the warehouse and do my run. Quickly, I run to my truck and take off. I'm gone for about 2 hours and they call me. Once saying again, movement detected, and they don't seem to see anything on the million-plus cameras. I arrive back with some cardboard boxes we have to break down into different bins. I'm by myself this time in the actual warehouse and I get this feeling I'm being watched. Can't describe it, but it's like someone was around the corner just staring at me. I couldn't shake it. I finished up my work. I get a text message before my shift that day from my boss saying we need to talk before my shift. Long story, Shorty tells me someone passed in the warehouse 10 or so years ago and it's haunted. We walked out to the warehouse and right where I felt uneasy at the bins, he stopped without me saying anything and said, "This is where I always feel someone is watching me." I never had another experience besides that night. Story 12. Worked security for a local security company that was just starting up and specialized in monitoring heavy levy equipment out in the orchards. I had no radio, no gun, no mace, no flashlight, and no phone service. I was strictly there to monitor and take notes, but if anything did happen, the nearest help was 45 minutes away in town. Fast forward to a few weeks of night shifts along the levee with it being surrounded by orchards. And I was pretty comfortable at my new location with its 1 road in and 1 road out as the only entrance for a few miles. It was about 2 in the morning when I hear an alarm clock going off somewhere in the murky darkness. I'm positioned alongside the levee in this position, O plus O, with my car being the O on the right, the levee as the plus, and the alarm sound coming from the O on the left. I turn my car on and drive over the levee to where the workers had a portable office container with a few chairs and a table set up, and where it sounds like the alarm is coming from. As my dim high beam started to sweep across the orchard, I see a dark figure multiple rows back seem to fade behind a tree quickly. I stop there and stare into the darkness, barely disrupted by my car's headlights. Nothing moves, and I can hear the alarm still going off, so I get out of my car and using my phone's light, I find the culprit sat upon a white plastic table. A single small, square, battery-powered alarm clock was singing away as my brain screamed at me to return to my car. I quickly popped the batteries out of the alarm and hopped back into my car as the silence returned to the orchards. As I was reversing out of the spot, my headlights bathed the trees in light again, and the same similar shape was now 3 or 4 rows closer, and this time, it seemed to crouch down behind a tree. I sat there for a moment longer staring into the void before my brain screeched. What if there's more, and this is the distraction? That thought encouraged me to back up onto the high part of the levee, and there I waited for the next 3.5 hours alone. It felt torturous, like 1,000 eyes were burrowing into every square inch of my car and soul from every angle. The quietness of an orchard is something very unsettling in the wintertime, as there's no insects or wildlife wandering about. All I could hear was silence and my pounding heart for the next 3.5 hours of my shift. I almost wanted some monster to come tearing through the trees, bellowing out, "Haha, here I am, here to eat you!" But instead I saw and heard nothing more. My morning shifter shows up late and starts casually drinking his hot cup of coffee. As I give him the rundown, while the sun starts to peek into the sky, I still remember the steam trail from his mug and the chirping of early birds as we decided to investigate further into the orchards. We ended up at the spot where I saw the figure, and after some quick scanning, he ended up spotting some really large footprints from boots that seemed to pace back and forth in a line along one row of trees. We then tracked them as they led forward towards the worker's office container and abruptly stopped near a tree while still a few rows back. Nothing more. No follow-up footprints leading forward or backwards. No vehicle tracks leading out of the dirt. No one could have gotten past me without trudging through the orchard. It was as if someone appeared, paced back and forth in a line for a few hours, walked forward, and then just disappeared without another step. We reported it to the boss, and he shrugged it off, saying maybe it was an elaborate prank by the construction workers. But that was one of the last shifts I worked doing security. Story 13. I used to work at a nightclub, and every night after my shift, I had to take a bus and walk for 10 minutes back home. One night in the middle of the walk, it's just me on the street. No cars. Everything's silent. I see far away this guy that looked in distress. I take off my headphones and hear him talking to himself, but I couldn't understand what he was saying. He sees me, stops, and just stares at me for a few seconds. I get a horrifying feeling that something will happen. Feel the adrenaline rush through my body, but I keep walking normally. Then he starts running towards me, screaming, "Where's my brother?" repeatedly. I just turn back. I start running the other way. Fortunately, I was faster and managed to get away, but I can still hear him screaming around the blocks looking for me. That was a terrifying experience, and I remember feeling so relieved as I walked into my building and locked my door. But after that, every night I started walking with just one headphone on and tried to stay aware of my surroundings the whole time. Maybe it was just an addict and he wouldn't harm me, but I didn't want to take the chance. Story 14. I like to watch horror movies while I'm doing midnights, and while watching The Ring, the phone in the movie rings at the exact same time my fax machine phone rings. I answer and nothing for a few secs, and I get a normal work fax, but still freaked me out. Story 15. Most disquieting was during the Rodney King riots. There was looting relatively near our grocery store. They closed the store, but the night crew chief walked around the store, handing us baseball bats, and said if the store was breached, we should feel free to defend ourselves. Nothing happened, of course, but was a surreal moment. Story 16. Damn, I've been waiting to tell this story. I do not believe in ghosts and crap. I'm a Scully, okay? When I was 22 years old, I worked graveyard as a cashier at the Chevron gas station at 82nd and Burnside in Portland. Or, I heard lots of people say this was the ghetto. There is no ghetto in Portland. Or one night in the dead of winter, I was outside smoking a cigarette, tucked off to the side of the building so as not to light the place up. There wasn't much traffic, as it was after 3 a.m. Bars there close at 2. Suddenly, from the knee, a radio cab pulled into the lot. They came in a little hot, you know. Some of those taxi drivers were a little daredevil-y, so I was ready to deal with one of these cranky overnight cabbies. The driver was an older white man, portly and bald. He looked damn pissed, but also sort of confused. Could be I was projecting, because I only caught a glimpse of his face as he pulled in and stopped just long enough for the passenger to get out. He hadn't even shut the door before the cabbie pulled away, lurching forward and speeding west on Burnside Ave. The guy who got out looked just normal, a little handsome, didn't seem drunk, wearing black slacks and a button-down shirt, plus a leather jacket. Not the cool motorcycle kind, mind you, but the kind Adam Scott probably wears. I'd stubbed out my cigarette and walked toward him, opening the door to the convenience store to usher him in. He looked somewhat sheepish, ruffling the hair at the back of his head as he declined to come inside. He asked if I would call him a cab. What was wrong with the last one? I joked. He laughed. I don't know, dude. Damn guy just yelled at me to get out. Got a better fare, maybe. Weird. So I went inside and grabbed the cordless phone. These weren't the days before cell phones, but it was before smartphones. I dialed the number for the company I personally had memorized, which was Radio Cab. The dispatcher answered as I was walking back across the store. She asked the location. I gave the address, and then she asked the passenger's name. Oh crap, I said. Let me go ask. I was already at the door and stepped out. Hey, I called out, realizing he was no longer standing where I'd left him. Huh, I said to dispatch. Hold on, I gotta find the guy. The building was small. Behind the C-store was a Safeway with a very large parking lot, wrapped around 2 sides of the building. The other 2 sides were bordered by 82nd Ave, and Burnside St. A Walgreens was across the street. Besides that, used car lots further off. The passenger was nowhere to be seen. That wouldn't have been so unusual had it not been for the layout. There was nowhere this dude could have fully hidden or run off to in the, 15? Maybe 20 seconds I was inside the store. Not to mention the snow, not a whole lot of hiding places. I walked out to the sidewalk, both ways. I looked in the dumpster. I walked into the Safeway parking lot. Dude was gone. I was sharing all this information with the dispatcher, who was amused and somewhat invested at this point. I told her about his drop-off. I narrated my search. "That's so weird," she said. "What did the driver look like?" I described him as I have to you. I heard her keyboard click-clacking, pother dispatch gals in the background. "There aren't a lot of drivers out right now because it's so late. I only show one in the area." She trailed off, and I was damn confused and eager to solve this mystery. "The only driver in the area right now is a black lady," she told me. We both expressed confusion and, if I'm being honest, a general feel of unease. She gave me her extension to call her back if I figured anything out, telling me she'd be off around 7 a.m. I never saw the guy again. I didn't call dispatch back. That was it. There's nothing else to the story. I didn't stock the damn cooler until my relief came in. Damn that. I was the only one in that store that night, and I wanted to continue believing that. Story 17. I used to work at this one-off little fast food joint in this small town. Place was kind of a local institution because it had been there so long and the burgers were actually really good. The owner was kind of a jabroni, pretty cool overall, but a cheap old miser. So even though practically no one came late at night, he paid such low wages that he turned a small profit by staying open 24 hours a day for the few that did come. Anyway, the point being that one of the crappy things about working there was everyone had to take turns on these boring AF graveyard shifts. So the first time I'm on the overnight, it's just me and this one other guy. Again, place is dead, so we pretty much just spend the whole time shooting the crap. At some point, he asked me if I know how the current owner got the place. I hadn't lived there long, so I didn't know. I just assumed he was the original owner since he had it for like 20 years. So then my coworker gets this kind of devious glint in his eye and tells me the story. Apparently the current owner bought the business dirt cheap. Big surprise there, because back in the day there was a death there. Not just a one guy, but a double. And that guy who hit other guy he's life away. The guy who hit was an employee, a drifter that the original owner had hired as a cook because he felt bad for him. And in fact, it had happened on an overnight shift, the victims just being two guys working there. He says that this is fairly well known among the people who had lived in that town for a long time, and that there is a persistent legend connected to the incident. Late at night, the killer's ghost comes back to visit and finish off the job. His visits were always preceded by the lights cutting in and out and the killer scraping his bloody muted weapon on the door. Ooh, right? Obviously, I knew the guy was just messing with me, but it was just late and quiet enough to make me feel a little eerie. So we go back to basing about other stuff, whatever, just trying to pass the time and stay awake. Well, I guess I didn't succeed because all of a sudden I feel myself come out of a doze. You know how if a constant background noise suddenly stops, it can wake you up? Well, I think that's what happened. Suddenly, the buzz from the fluorescent lights is gone, and it's completely dark. I feel a half second of fear until I realize what's going on. I turn toward the light switch and call out to my coworker. "Yeah, very funny." Then, with noticeable fear in his voice, I hear him answer from behind me. That wasn't me. He's on the other side of the dining room. No way he could have thrown the switch and made it back over there that fast without me hearing him. The lights turn back on and we just look at each other stunned for a few seconds before the light goes off again. Then it comes back on and starts flickering. I'm seriously weirded out at this point, and I'm telling him to cut it out even though I know he can't be doing it. I hear my voice cracking as I talk. He's trying to play it cool, but I can tell he's as spooked as I am. Then we hear it. A slow, deliberate, unmistakable sound of metal scraping across glass. The lights are still flickering, and we slowly turn to look toward the front door. There's a shadowy, person-shaped thing, I don't know, and it's clearly moving something across the glass door. We're frozen for what feels like hours. We both know that we're not hallucinating. Finally, my coworker snaps. He had had enough and was just going to confront this thing even if it hit him. So he runs at the door like a madman and is screaming at the top of his lungs, "What are you? Get the duck out of here!" Honestly, one of the bravest things I've ever seen. He throws the door open, ready to confront the ghost, and you know what he finds? Some weird guy asking if we're hiring. Who does that in the middle of the night? So even though we're a little miffed, we're both super relieved and have a little laugh at ourselves for letting the late night get to us. But then it hits us like a ton of bricks and at the exact same time. If the scraping was coming from that guy, who was turning the lights on and off? We're instantly terrified again. We look at each other and then slowly turn toward the light switch. And who was there? Damn Nosferatu. Story 18. I used to work nights, and one night I was sent home early because we were overstaffed. So it was about 1 a.m. I am driving home on empty streets and stop at a red light. I sense movement, and I see an animal walking towards my car. It's a very tall animal, looks like a coyote, but was as tall as my car. It is staring me down, and then as I lock eyes with it, it starts running towards my car. So I step on the gas, run the red light, and booked it home. Never have I been so freaked out by something like that. My husband thinks maybe I was partly falling asleep or something, but I remember it so clearly. Story 19. My mom worked as a hotel manager in a Grand Castle-like old hotel, and one night, she wasn't able to find a babysitter. So I spent the night in the back rooms of a damn haunted hotel. I was about 11. Every old hotel has tons of back alleys and ways for the staff to get around quickly and not be seen. Dumbwaiters, lifts, stairs, corridors, etc. They're often very narrow but have high ceilings so people can wheel large racks behind them. Sometimes you'd run into small locker rooms, or a break room with a mini cafeteria, or things like that. And then beyond a nondescript door, you're right beside the royal suite. There was a whole floor, a floor and a half up from the main entry lobby floor, dedicated to several massive ballrooms, used for conventions or weddings, stuff like that. In the biggest one was a huge chandelier made of true crystal and actual gas lights, with gorgeous banisters and an auditorium set up. It was grand in the literal sense, huge and extremely beautiful. The crown molding was literally carved from whole pine logs. Crap was pushing 150 years old, but was beautifully oiled and preserved. So it's about 11 p.m. Mom is trying to get me out of the way because around this time, many late flights arrive and business people need rooms for early meetings the next day. So I went on an adventure. I found a cool back way into the swimming pool area, and the bartender there made me a Lil Shirley Temple drink for free. I skipped off and went about my business exploring. As I was deciding whether to take a left or a right at a backway junction, I heard a damn massive rumbling crash. Like 1,000 smashing dishes. I couldn't pinpoint where it was because it was so huge. It was like a damn entire floor collapsed. I was frightened, but not as frightened as I was seeing tons of people stream out of the break room in shock and guys running towards it asking what happened. I decided to run back to my mom, and my mother was waiting, happy to see I was okay. It came from right above her, and in the minutes after we didn't know if a floor had collapsed or a tree had fallen through a roof, or who knows what the duck happened. Everyone assumed that the chandelier had come loose and fallen down to the ground, smashing through the top layer of pine wood flooring. Suddenly, of course, tons of calls from people's rooms started lighting up her front desk, asking about what the heck just happened and what they had just heard. So you've got to imagine half the entire hotel was witness to this crash. After assuring a bunch of guests they were figuring it out, she noticed that no matter where the people were calling from, the report was far away from above. They heard the crash, regardless of what floor. Even people on the top floors, far above the ballrooms, reported it as coming from above. What the heck? So maintenance people started appearing and saying they'd searched the entire ballroom floor, and now people were searching guest room floors, searching for the crash. The chandelier was perfectly fine, and the door to the ballroom was locked. The other rooms were undisturbed too, their chairs and tables secured and untouched. Where the duck did this crash come from? They literally searched all night for the source of this until one of the other managers came in the morning the next day, and they told her the weef was going on. She told my mom, "Oh yeah, that's happened before, like 20 years ago." It woke everyone up and they never found the source of it. All she knew was that when the hotel was being built, the chandelier they were installing fell during that installation and hitting like 4 workers below. No idea if that's true, but they had to replace the pine flooring which had been damaged. The chandelier, however, was far too expensive to replace, so they hammered the bent parts back into place, and the same one that skewered those workers still hangs above everyone's heads to this day. Sometimes at night, very rarely, you hear that crash and everyone freaks the duck out every time. It was dismissed either as rogue lightning or settling floors. Story 20. I worked at a mental institution as a psychiatric nurse aide. My ward was the new arrivals, blind and deaf, long-term patients, and less violent forensic patients from jail. I worked the 10 shift at first, but then realized that daycare cost more than the money I made, so I started working nights. I was not a big believer in an afterlife before I started working there, but that changed very quickly working nights. One night I was doing our 15-minute checks with another PNA, and we were walking from the women's side to the men's. It's a long hallway of 9 by 9 bedrooms, a day room, a hallway, another day room, and another hall of patient rooms. At the end of each hall was the stairs. In this hospital, doors are locked at all times. Doors to the stairwells, the emergency stairs, the lobby, the nurse's office. Everything but the bathrooms and the day rooms are locked. We were walking towards the men's hall, and I watched someone, a man with a bald head and no facial features whatsoever, rise from a crouching position in front of the stairwell, turn right, and walk directly through another doorway. The room he walked into was a locked room. He just went straight through it. I was so shaken up that after that night, I used all my vacation to take a week off. Later, I worked in the medical wing, which was mostly patients with severe degenerative diseases, who needed constant care, but were in the hospital due to severe depression, or people with lifelong epilepsy who had so much brain damage from severe seizures that I guess their families determined them mentally ill. and we were the last place that would home them. We had Huntington's patients who want to pass before admission, or patients with chronic diseases and schizophrenia, stuff like that. One night I was doing checks and saw a man standing beside the window looking up. I very clearly heard him say, "Look at the moon." But when I realized what I had just seen, I hauled ass to the nurse's office because it scared the hell out of me. The man in front of the window was black, and we didn't have a black man in our ward at all at that point. On the blind, deaf ward, we got older teens from the local blind, deaf school. People who had contracted syphilis while homeless. Left untreated, it can cause blindness and schizophrenia-like symptoms. Even someone who removed his own eyeballs because his hallucinations told him to. We had to know sign language and understand accommodations for the visually impaired. It was usually chilly in the building, so I would wear long-sleeved t-shirts under my scrubs. Whenever I didn't, I would always get the weirdest, tickling pressure sensation on my right arm, like I had a hair there, but not that exact feeling. It happened enough times that I thought, maybe there was something making me get a static charge. Maybe. I was trying to find explanations because it happened off and on for months. Then once, when I had a bad sunburn and had my short-sleeved scrub top on, I got the same sensation. I brushed at my arm like I always did, trying to remove whatever hair it felt like was on me. And my coworker asked who grabbed my arm. She showed me in a mirror that in my sunburn were very distinct finger marks. Like when you press your sunburn and your bright red skin turns skin-colored again, but you could see almost full fingers on the outside of my arm. I lifted my arm and there was a thumbprint on the inside. We couldn't figure out why it was, but I told them about the tickling sensation I frequently felt, and we realized that the marks on my arm were exactly where a blind person's hand would be if I was leading them. We only had 3 blind people on the ward at that point, and I arrived after lights out, so I hadn't had anyone touch my arm like that for at least 2 days before the sunburn. It was very strange. It only happened when I was walking towards the men's medroom or the men's showers. I have a lot more. It was a wonderful job, but a very difficult thing to deal with. I ended up on medication for anxiety. Now my husband works in the much older part of the asylum, built in the 1800s, converted to a hotel in the past few years, and I have a job as a night baker there. I won't sleep there. Story 21. I worked as a locomotive engineer for Amtrak. For 37 years, I just recently retired. I drove most of the lines that came out of Los Angeles. That particular night, it was the summer of '97, I was driving the Sunset Limited. The train runs through the desert on its way to Florida. So with no one around for hours, I was doing double the speed since we left a little late due to a mechanical problem. It's about 3 a.m. I'm talking to my conductor about how Jordan just won another finals. I'm doing about 90 miles per hour now. I happen to just light a cig and look out my window and see weird lights coming up from a ridge near us. I saw one bright orange light, then a second. Me and later a third. Me knowing we were outside of Phoenix, I said to myself it had to be planes leaving the airport or F-16s doing a routine training mission. I didn't pay much mind, but it bothered me since planes always have beacons and navigation lights. These orbs, I'd call them, seemed to move around in ways it wasn't humanly possible. We're still driving when my conductor suddenly moves near the windshield, points to something and says, "Crap, what the heck is that?" A black triangle ID estimate the size of football field was over the ridge where we had last seen the orbs and stayed there motionless. We were stunned. After a few mins, it started moving at the same speed as our train, moving closer and closer. I couldn't tell if it was silent, since the locomotive I was driving was being operated at high RPMs. The ship passed on top of us slowly. I could see the same colored orbs under the ship I had seen before at the ridge. But other than that, nothing else, since it was pretty much impossible to really get out my seat and look. It was just pure black. As the ship hovered above us, we started to lose communication with the dispatcher. And I started losing power from the train's generator. They seemed to study us for about a minute and then took a sharp 90-degree turn and accelerated at high speed northwest towards Las Vegas. That's when the train suddenly started to operate back to normal. Our dispatcher called us thinking we had derailed since he heard nothing but static from our end. It freaks me out because I know it had to be a UFO. There is no other explanation for something that big moving that slow. I was a skeptic and never believed anything about the paranormal. But after seeing what I did for those brief 30 minutes, my life changed forever. A few years ago, I realized my experience had happened only a few months after the famous Phoenix lights, where huge UFOs were also seen by thousands in Phoenix, Arizona, including military and law enforcement personnel. I've seen my fair shares of creepy things driving trains late at night, but that topped it. Story 22. Hotel night auditor here. I work at fairly nice, middle-class hotel in a decent area, but because I am usually completely alone at night, aside from my senior citizen security guard, I watch my cameras all night. The monitor is right on my desk next to my computer screen. They're not the greatest quality, but they're better than nothing. One night I see a man walking towards the front door from the side. Something about him made me pay extra attention, but I'm not sure what yet. He quickly walks in and goes straight up the stairs, which are located just inside the front door. which means he didn't have to walk past my desk. I watched him go up the first few stairs, thinking I had lost him, and wouldn't figure out what was off about him because, unfortunately, I only have cameras on the first floor. Thankfully, our second floor opens up to a balcony that overlooks the lobby, and I heard the stairwell door open and close on the second floor. I walked out to the lobby to see if I could see him on the second floor, and almost immediately heard him banging on a door down the hall and hollering for someone. I called out to him, "Excuse me! Hello, sir! Excuse me!" After a moment, the banging stops and he walks over to the balcony. For the first time, I see him fully, and he was covered in blood. Head, neck, face, pants, shoes. Turned out he was seriously plastered and had just been in a bar fight. He ended up crying on the bench outside with my security guard while waiting for cops and emergency to show up. I felt so bad for the guy. But let me tell you all that when I first saw him all covered in blood, I thought I was about to be the next one on hit or something. Story 23. I worked night audit in a small city with quite a few people addicted to meth. We had a 24-hour casino, so they would usually hang around there looking for tickets with leftover change so they could SC enough together for something. This hotel guest, however, stayed a night with us and creeped me out even then. He calls me at like 2 a.m. asking for simple things like toothbrush and paste, a razor, lotion, etc. I put it in a little laundry bag and took it up to his room. The door was ajar, as if he wanted me to just come in. Absolutely damn not. So I knock, and knock, and knock, and knock. No answer, so I slip the bag in the room and set it next to the door. Book it back downstairs. Now, I fully admit I'm irrational. I hit the worst possible explanation as to why he didn't answer, and it was, he'd take his life away and wanted me to find his body. I knew this was irrational, so I ignored my gut, but called the room just in case. No answer. An hour later, he calls me back, said he was in the shower. But I didn't hear the shower when I was outside his somewhat open door. Whatever. Maybe I just didn't hear it. Now he wants a towel. Could I bring it? I take him the towel. Knock. He answers this time, fully dressed, hair done, and cologne on. Looks like he was heading out. Don't know what he needed the towel for, but I hand it over and book it. He ends up coming downstairs and hangs out in my lobby. He says, "I'm having a hard time sleeping. Mind if I sit and watch some TV here?" But like, his room has a TV. Whatever, man, have a blast. He gets up, announces, "I have to use the bathroom. I'll be right back." And he's in there for 45 minutes. I'm getting so many bad vibes from this guy, but I know I'm super nervous about people in general, so I try to ignore it. He finally comes out and comes to the desk. Starts asking me things like, "Are you religious? What religion? What church?" etc. Then he tells me, "The only thing I look forward to is having my name put into the Lamb's Book of Life. I'm an atheist. I have no idea what that is." So I guess he can tell and decides to tell me about it. And he's practically oozing death vibes at this point. He says, "I'm going to heaven one way or another, and you're coming with me." Now, in hindsight, this was probably his way of trying to save my soul, but it sounded like, "I'm taking you to heaven. Tonight." He asks me to come to his truck. He has a book for me. I say no. I have to stay at the desk. "Can you come out to the patio? Just for air. I have a bad feeling in here." I go to the end of the tile and tell him that's as far as I go. He gets in his truck, reaches into the glove box, and I felt that fear that he was about to hit himself, or me, but mostly him. But instead, he sits there for a hot minute, puts it back into his glove box, and just yells, "I left it at home. I'll be back," and drives off. He came back about 7 times after that. His card declined for a second night, so my manager wouldn't let him come back. But he came specifically for me. He told my part-timer who covers my days off. He'd come in, ask for me, then leave when he finds out it's my day off. He's on med, I think, an alcoholic. His wife left him, took the kids, so he's in a rough place, but he scares me. I called the cops every time I see him. They chat with him, he leaves, comes back another day. I lost it, finally. Maybe verbally abused the dispatch to tell the cops to actually do something, because it's harassment and trespassing and scary. They finally got him for trespassing, and he tells them, "I guess everyone here is going to hell. I tried to save you." Story 24. Not my story, but my father's. Years ago, he worked the graveyard shift at an ice cream production plant. It was usually only him and the security guys, who only came in for coffee and to shoot the crap, and otherwise stayed in the gate hut outside or patrolled around the lot, unless there was an overnight production run, when there'd be a skeleton crew of sorts. Point being, my father was usually alone in a huge empty building. Between one thing and another, it was never totally silent, even in the middle of the night, and he got used to odd noises like thumping, knocking, hissing, etc. He was always perfectly at ease working there. No creepy feelings at all. His work took him out into odd corners of the building, and on one of these excursions, he happened to glance up over one of the temperature-controlled storage rooms and saw 2 glowing red lights, close together, like glowing red eyes in the very darkest part of that particular corner. Not creepy. There was machinery and pipes and all sorts of standard production plant stuff everywhere. and it seemed reasonable to him that there should be some kind of switch or power display or something up there. It was probably fine, and anyway, it wasn't his job to go climbing on top of storage rooms to investigate lights. The rest of the night passed uneventfully, as did several others, and the next time he passed that area, he noticed the lights weren't there. Sometime later, however, the lights were back. My father made it a kind of a game, because being the only one in an empty building is boring, and the internet wasn't a thing yet, to check for the eyes every time he happened to pass through that area. He playfully referred to the lights as a ghost, and gave it a name, George. Whenever the lights were there, he took to calling out, "Hello, George!" or "Good night, George!" All of us kids knew the story, and since Dad would sometimes take us to the plant to pick up papers or whatever on the weekends, we would also run out to that area to wave and greet George, although we never saw the lights. So fast forward several years, and my father is working out the last few nights at that job before he moves on to another one in another state, and part of his final duties are taking the new person around to show them the layout of the building and so forth. Accompanying them is one of the company technicians who has worked there a million years. As Dad passes George's haunt, he mentions the lights you can sometimes see up there. Technician gets a funny look and goes to fetch a ladder. He climbs up there, calls Dad and the new hire up, and shows them there's nothing there that can either produce or reflect light. Absolutely nothing but walls. Some black pipes and some boxes of old packaging materials. Everything with a good coat of undisturbed dust. They spent a few minutes playing with flashlights, trying to get a reflection and could not produce one. Also, no windows or skylights of any kind in that area through which light could shine down anyway. No security cameras or any device that could make a light, and no evidence in the dust to suggest anyone but them had been up there in years. On Dad's last night, he wandered out to that area and stood for a while, looking up at the top of the storage area. All was dark and silent. Feeling silly, he told the nothing that it was his last night, and he wanted to say goodbye, and thanks for keeping him company so many years. "Good night, George," he said, and just before he turned away, the red lights came on, looked at him for a few seconds, then vanished again. He's adamant about every detail of this story to this day, but will always emphasize that it's not a ghost story. To his knowledge, no one ever passed in the plant, and there was never any kind of haunting-style shenanigans, so he would not agree it is a creepy story at all. Story 25. I worked at a approved premises, which is a halfway house of offenders too dangerous, but legally allowed to be released into the community on probation. You don't need much of an imagination to know what type of heinous things some of these guys had done. It's like the worst stuff, but the stuff I'm not allowed to talk about and the media can't report. An old member of staff described the air as being vexatious once, which I found fitting. The building itself was an old granite cottage, which had been converted and extended and converted and extended. It was a mess and a rabbit run and a nightmare to navigate. The secure staff offices were tucked away at the front near the road, but were pretty weak. Single latch door, single pane windows, you get the idea. The place was soaked in CCTV though. 2 incidents spring to mind. Middle of the night, 4 a.m. I'm tired. CCTV is doing its thing. That's nothing except the odd old offender going for a piss. And I'm on Excel figuring out a stupid formula to count substances tests. We're double crewed, but my colleague is out back catching up on admin, snoozing. Now you see, being a bored-tired geek, I figured out the controls to make the CCTV fully automated. Basically, if there is movement, the camera will instantly flick to that channel full screen and boop at you loudly to show you the movement. No sound though. Took a while to sort as you needed to hit areas of screens to stop the detection, like branches and trees or car light reflections, but it was damn accurate when done. I was a hero amongst the night crew. So happily tapping away, sip of coffee, glance at sex TV, then out of literally nowhere, something shouts my name. I crap my pants, hair on the back of my neck, flight or flight. Laugh moment. The window was ajar slightly, so thought it was a passerby. Nope, no one up or down the street. Made is soundly asleep out back. He's pranked me before. It's not him as he just is after. Nothing on the cameras. This was a clear, loud, someone next to me name call. Freaks me out to this day. Second one was explainable, but still, same as before. Pitch black. Just me. Think I was playing Diablo 2 or something on my laptop. Boop. One of the cameras shows a fire door closing on the top floor corridor in infrared black-white mode. You can hear the door slowly slam. Heavy fire doors bang even when gently closed in the distance before you see the footage. Weird, I thought. Boop. Another door slowly closes as I hear it thud across the building. This one was closer, adjoining corridor. Boop another. Boop another. Each one getting closer to the staff officers and both sets of CCTV showing separate images. I desperately thinking of a logical reason this was happening, but it was too orderly, too deliberate and hellish freaky. Now these are simple lock, key fire doors. Nothing fancy. What the heck is going on, I was thinking. You can guess where my mate was. It took me a few seconds after the one literally I could see through the reinforced glass panel. in front of the offices slowly closed. They each had a small red box at the bottom, which was a doorstop fitted only in the last month. But they reacted via sound to fire alarm and would release and close the doors. But they test themselves once a month so you could tell when the batteries needed replacing. The guy who had fitted them activated them all in sequence when he did his last check, creating my sleep-deprived real-time horror movie at 4 a.m. Story 26. I guess this is the opposite of creepy, but this is what comes to mind. I used to work at a restaurant that closed late. We often wouldn't get out of there until 4:30 to 5 a.m. after cleaning up. It was in this old brick building that had some kind of history, although nothing crazy enough that anyone ever talked about it much. One night, these ghost hunters, who had some sort of podcast or YouTube channel or Facebook group or something, had asked if they could come in overnight and look for paranormal activity and film it. They came in at like midnight on a slow night and started getting set up. The idea was they would spend all night in this possibly haunted building looking for ghosts with their equipment. The only thing the few of us working there had spent countless nights in there and hadn't seen anything, obviously. So it was just incredibly bizarre and awkward watching these people set up cameras all over while I finished wiping down the tables. Story 27. I worked the overnight shift at a 7-Eleven. Another night, the store got swarmed with like 200 people in Halloween costumes. They stole the place blind. I was too terrified to say crap. Manager was super pissed. Story 28. Anyways, I worked at a hotel when I was in my early 20s. It was a brand new hotel in a small town that was heavy on tourism in the summer. In the winter, however, it was dead. We'd get people on business here and there, but there were some nights where we literally had like 5 rooms out of 200 rented out. I was covering the night shift for someone on one of those nights, and it was so slow that I spent the majority of the time playing WoW on my laptop. Then at like 12:30 a.m., this creepy-looking dude strolls in. I offer to help him, but he's just ignoring me and talking to himself as he looks around the lobby. He was looking at every corner and nodding and mumbling to himself. Finally, I walked around the counter and went right up to him to see what I could do for him. He then said a whole bunch of nonsense about he used to own this building. It was just built a few months earlier, and eventually asked me for a book of matches. I explained to him that we didn't have any of those, and he got super upset and started getting about how his hotel always had matches. I was trying to get him to leave, so I went and took a lighter out of the lost and found and gave it to him. He continued to mumble and crap, and then lit up a cigarette right in the lobby. I told him he couldn't do that, pretty sure the dude was on substances or whatever, and after a few minutes he agreed to go outside. He then stood directly in front of the lobby entrance and smoked while staring at me. At this point, I felt very uncomfortable and had my cell phone and the hotel phone ready to call the police. When he finally finished his cigarette, he flicked it at the door and walked away. I shrugged it off and figured that was the end of it. A couple hours later, I was doing my rounds to check the exits and pool and such. Well, lo and behold, Mr. Smoker was standing at one of the side entrances smoking and again, just staring into the building. I told him he had to leave if he wasn't a guest, and the guy didn't say a word, flicked his cigarette butt at me, and walked away. As he was walking away, I told him if I saw him again, I'm going to report him for trespassing. A couple hours later, it was like 5 a.m. now, I once again saw this damn guy standing right outside the entrance. Before I confronted him, I called the cops. They said they were 3 minutes away. I walked out and told him the cops were coming. He flicked his stupid cigarette at me yet again, and then told me to tell Mr. Walker that he was looking for him. No one in the hotel had that last name, guest or employee. So I still have no idea what he was talking about, and he somehow managed to avoid the police before they got there. I never saw him again, but that crap still creeps me out to this day. Story 29. Not exactly a night shift, but at my old plumbing job, we did 24-hour call-outs. One night at around 11 p.m., I get a call from an elderly-sounding woman who sounded pretty distressed as she had a water leak and lived alone and was unable to turn the water off. She gave me the address. Some little village about half an hour south of the city I live in. I tell her I'm on my way. Cut to about 40 miles later, and my sat-nav tells me I've arrived. I'm on a country lane next to a gate with a wooden sign with the house name she gave me carved into it. I opened the gate, drove through and shut it behind me, then started crawling up the very bumpy driveway. I still couldn't see the house. Driveway goes up a hill and round to the right. Behind some bushes is this kind of run-down-looking farmhouse. Not unusual at all. But it was kind of weird that all the lights were off. As I drive closer, I can make out closed curtains. No car, no light at all coming from anywhere except my van. I'm kind of creeped out by it. Park up, get out, and walk toward the front door. There's 2 to choose from. So I walk towards the one nearest me, knock loud, and wait. 20 seconds or so passed, and I knock again, and then again a minute or so later. No phone signal here. She called from a landline, but I couldn't call it back. Walk around the back of the house to see if I can see any sign of life. Now starting to feel scared AF because this place was starting to look like it might be empty. I know I'm in the right place. There's another plaque on the house to confirm it. But I thought, damn this, I'm leaving. As I'm walking back to my van, I heard what sounded like a large piece of sheet metal falling over, really shutting myself now. Start to walk faster. Notice an old roofing sheet laid flat on the floor. Convinced myself it was the wind and got back in the van. Drove back up the driveway fast. Absolutely certain that a ghost had called me out to a leak at a creepy abandoned farmhouse. And I curl up in a ball and cry. As I reach the road, my phone gets signal again. 2 missed calls from the old woman's phone number. I call it back, genuinely, a bit terrified. A woman answered and explained that the woman who called me was living in a care home about 20 miles away with severe dementia. She'd got hold of the phone at 11 p.m. while having a bout of confusion and called the contact marked plumber on the landline. She used to live in that farmhouse. She said she was very sorry, that the old lady had done it before and she hoped I hadn't left to go there yet. Relief swept over me, but so did the frustration that I'd gone out at 11 p.m. to what I now refer to as a ghost call. Story 30. Several decades ago, I did the night shift at a local corner store in one of the less nice areas of town. Highly dodgy would be generous in describing it. Hilariously, it's now gentrified to the max. One night, the glass door slid open and in strode a half-naked, bone-thin dude who was obviously off his tree and high as a kite. I knew that wild look well. I'd seen this guy before on more than one occasion. What made this night unique was the blood-filled syringe he was wielding. Now, after a couple of years of solo night shift in that place, I'd been held up several times. Knife, baseball bat, even a gun, rare in Australia. But that syringe was new and frightening. Other holdups were scary, but run-of-the-mill. Hand over the $50, that was all I kept in the till, and they were on their way. This guy, Gavin was his name, didn't know what planet he was from or on while making demands about giving him everything I had. I have never been so scared in my life. Thankfully, he sawed it off with his $50 and a few packs of smokes. Police picked him up 15 minutes after I called them. They knew him well also. Found out it was his blood, and he was HIV positive as well, have hep C and a few other things. He got a stint in the fish ward. That is my creepiest life experience by far. Story 31. Night shift often has stories about the building being haunted. The rest of the office is closed, and there are at most 3 people on staff in the call center overnight. They've talked about hearing women's voices in the bathroom mostly. But there have been other incidents that I can't exactly recall. The only reason I remember the women's voices bit is because I basically debunked it, when the building is effectively shut down except the one room down the hall. It's easy to hear the remaining employees in the call center chatting with each other while the third person is in the bathroom. Most of them are women, save for the one guy who's really soft-spoken. That isn't to say the building isn't haunted. Night shift assumed the ghost is a woman they call Sal. I'm pretty sure Sal is actually a man. One night, as I was heading to the bathroom, I heard a loud and distinctive whistle right at the threshold of the break room, just as I was passing by it. It was the generic kind of whistle one would expect when someone is trying to get your attention. I stopped dead and stared into the empty break room and wondered if maybe it had been someone's phone notification. We store our phones in lockers, though, and I was certain for a millisecond that someone had been standing on the other side of the threshold. It wasn't the first time Sal had messed with me, damn. It wasn't even the most invasive thing he's ever done to me. So I just shrugged it off and went about my business. The solidifying evidence that convinced me that my workplace is haunted was the time Sal full-on goosed me while I was looking for my time card to punch out for the night. It was so forceful that I shouted, "Hey!" and swatted the space around my ass as I turned around to confront one of my coworkers. The nearest coworker was easily 4 feet away from me, slumped against the windowsill with his phone cradled in both of his hands. I distinctly remember how wide and stunned his eyes were when he slowly looked up from his screen and turned his head to look at me, bewildered and wary. It was the way I shouted, he later told me. It was in exactly the same way a woman announces she's about to go on a warpath, and he was the closest target. The other guys were all the way on the other side of the room, and they stopped washing up their dishes to stare at me and ask if I was okay. I started to ask the guy closest to me, but I stopped because I realized there was no way my dude could pull something like that and adopt such an unassuming pose in the second it took me to turn around. I was sure I would have heard him shuffle back. Plus, his confusion seemed genuine. So, yeah, goosed by a ghost. That's one for the books. Story 32. I work as a deputy in a rural county. Night shift. A good portion of my county is national forest. Supposedly, there are more miles of roads and trails in this forest than there are miles of interstate in my entire state. It's a massive place, and my zone is about 20 miles of rural highway, bordered to the south by national forest and to the north by another state forest. And it's usually just me out there at night. It's also the kind of place where I know everybody. Anyway, a few years back, I get dispatched to a crash at about 2 a.m. It's way out in the forest. So far, in fact, the guy that crashed had to call someone with his CB, and that person relayed the crash to dispatch. As soon as I get the vehicle description, I know who it is. He's a local that likes to drive back in the deepest, darkest, most remote places in that forest and just ride with his dog in the back. I finally get on scene, and his Toyota is piled into a huge old oak on the side of a 2-track, and he's dead white. He tells me with 100% seriousness that he was riding down this 2-track. It was foggy as crap, and he got a creepy feeling with all the hair on the back of his neck stood up. Then he says, a scorched, bony hand reached over from the dark near the passenger seat, yanked his steering wheel to the side, and sent him into a tree. He was adamant he saw the devil, and the devil made him crash. Now I know this dude. He's definitely not a crazy. There's no booze in the truck, and he doesn't seem drunk. I don't really know what to say to him, so I just write it up as a single vehicle crash and give him a ride home. He just sits there in my passenger seat the whole time, looking all around. Out the window, up at the sky, and back in the cage in the back of my patrol car, not saying a word. So that was weird enough. About a year later, a call comes in late at night for a welfare check. I recognize the name. His relatives say they haven't heard from him for a while, and they want us to check on him. I go to the house. His truck is in the driveway. Knock on the front door with no answer. It's unlocked, so I announce myself and walk in. Nobody inside. Open the back door and discover he's life away. He'd clearly been there a day or two, so maybe the devil finished what he started. It's kind of stupid to say, but sometimes when I'm out patrolling by myself in the middle of nowhere at 3 a.m., I remember him and get a creepy feeling. I'm all alone, but don't feel alone. I turn the dome light on in my patrol car and look around. I haven't found anything or anyone yet, but that don't mean they haven't found me. Story 33. I worked at a boys' home as the graveyard staff. Basically, I stayed up and watched the kids all night to make sure nothing happened. Since there were cameras in each room, I just monitored them from the office on a screen. Down the hallway from the office, there was a little room that had a small desk and a ton of books. It was a storage room for school supplies. One night, around 2 or 3 a.m., I hear a pop, kind of like the ones you hear in a fire. I scan each room on the monitor to see if any of the boys were awake. All were asleep. Trying not to spook myself, I just go back to reading. A few minutes later, I heard another pop, much louder this time, and I knew it came from that little room. I tried peering into the darkness, but I couldn't see anything. I sit there motionless, pretty spooked. Soon enough, I hear a series of pops go off and my heart starts pumping. I remember getting goosebumps on my neck and feeling chilly. I grab a flashlight from the desk drawer and shine it down the hall. The door to that little room was almost closed, even though I definitely remember having it open when I clocked in. I keep the light on the door and it starts to slowly open up. I have my phone out, ready to call 911 when I hear something drop loudly down the hall. I still can't see in the room, the door only half open. Soon after that loud thump, I hear another and another. I hear pages being ripped, books being tossed about in there. The thrashing went on for over a minute. All the while I'm paralyzed with fear, forgetting to breathe. After a minute, it goes quiet. I can hear my heart beating loudly. I keep the light on the door for what felt like a half hour. Nothing happens. I turn the flashlight off and get up to close the office door when I hear a door slam. I turn the flashlight on and focus on the door. It is now closed. I slam the office door shut and put some filing cabinets in front of it. The rest of the night was uneventful, and when the day staff come, I go and check out the room. Everything is tidy and neat, like nothing happened. I worked at that home for a little over a year, and when it burned down, I didn't come back after it was repaired. I refuse to work night shifts in any job to this day. Story 34. Only work nights for about a month, so I'll get back to you on better ones, but here's what I've got so far. I work in an addiction rehab facility. We had a guy the other night get so angry at the nurse's station because she was taking too long, less than 45 seconds, to get his meds, and politely asked him not to scream at 1 a.m., that he eventually had to be escorted out by the only male staff on duty that night and our badass clinical supervisor under threat of calling the police on him. He ended up being discharged and dropped with his belongings at the bottom of our driveway. The facility is on a huge hill, and told to figure it out from there. Patients have absolutely threatened staff. Haven't had it happen to me personally yet, but my coworker had a cup of soda thrown at her. There's a small forest in back of the facility, and problem patients like to sneak off to run around in there. One night, we were missing 5 of them and took a golf cart out to search for them. If you've never been on a golf cart in pitch black woods, I don't recommend it. Almost ran over a skunk on that same golf cart. It blended in too well, and my coworker didn't see it until the last minute, at which point she just screamed and pointed. I almost leapt out. Ghostly voice over our walkie-talkies came on and kept repeating "leave," over and over between garbled sounds. Turns out it was a staff member who was too far away to be heard clearly and was trying to tell us a patient wanted to leave. Still spooky, though. Disheveled addict playing hide and seek behind the building in the bushes at 3 a.m. Enough said. Story 35. Not midnight shift, but I worked at a Starbucks in a fancy hotel that opened at 3 a.m. Cops came in one morning to arrest a guy, but he wasn't in his room. He was at my coffee shop. The guy had come by to get coffee as soon as we opened every day for like a week. Never thought anything was wrong. I don't even know for sure what he did, but they came into the shop with full-geared SWAT guys. Not too creepy, but the whole thing was utterly terrifying. Story 36. I used to work at a duty-free on a bridge crossing. I was off one night, but while I was gone, a girl around 19 and guy around 30 walk in, and she's visibly upset and crying. They wander around the store, and she goes into the bathroom, and he tries to follow her in. My coworker goes into the bathroom to stop him, and they can hear her saying things like, "I'm just 19. What about my parents?" The guy leaves the bathroom, and my coworker tries to talk to her, but she won't say anything. After 20 more minutes of them talking in the vestibule, they head back to their car, but he gets in the passenger seat and she gets in the back. They drive towards the bridge. Note, there's no way to turn around when you get to the duty-free parking lot, so they only had one way to go, which was to the bridge. My manager calls over to the other side of the border to let them know what happened. 20 minutes later, they call back and say that there was only one person in the car. Our theory is that right after they drove past the building, they got out of the car and walked back into the country. Sex trafficking is no joke. Story 37. I was working at a property management company just out of Asterisk College and had done a showing the day before. I accidentally took the keys home, and I knew there was another showing at 8 a.m. the next day, but I wasn't starting until the afternoon. I didn't realize until around 1 a.m. So I went back to drop them in the chute through the door, as it was only a 10-minute drive. The office was in an office park, and it was pretty much empty except a few random cars. Well, I got out and started walking to the front, and one of the cars, a white van, was started, and they turned their high beams on, which were pointed in my direction. Nearly pissing my pants, I walked. The final few steps, dropped the keys, and half ran back to my car. As I was driving away, the van came all the way to the edge of the lot and just stopped there. After my panic calmed down, I realized it was probably a security guard on break, just trying to see what I was doing. But when I told my boss the story, he said, "There is no hired security, as he is one of the owners of the office park." My boss spoke to the police, and they promised to swing by a few nights that week. Nobody ever saw that van again. I don't know what their intentions were, but I'm glad I didn't find out. Story 38. I work night audit in an extended stay hotel that mostly caters to business people and displaced families, so nothing too crazy ever happened. And I've only been creeped out once, at around 4-ish. I had to use the bathroom, and to get to the employee bathroom, you had to go through the kitchen. I open the kitchen door and walk a few feet in total darkness. All of our lights are motion activated, and the kitchen sensors sometimes don't work right away. This can usually be fixed by flailing around as you walk around, hoping you don't smack your hand on a cabinet. As I entered the pitch black of the kitchen, I could sense something in here with me, feet away. I froze. Every sense I had screaming at me that I wasn't alone. I've passed through this kitchen several times a night every night for a few years, sometimes in pitch blackness, and never felt off in any way. I could just feel the presence of something in the kitchen hallway, completely hidden from sight. The thing shifting in darkness beyond whatever qualified as sight in that space. I couldn't bring myself to start waving around to try and trigger the light sensors, and I couldn't bring myself to take another step in fear of running into whatever's in here with me. I slowly backed out, pushed the door open with my back, and stepped out into the dining area. As the lights of the dining area briefly illuminated the kitchen, I saw nothing, though there were plenty of blind spots that the thing in the kitchen could have slinked away to. I've worked night shifts for years, and I had never had an experience like that and haven't since. Working late nights, you usually get sort of desensitized to weird nonsense going on. Like situations that would rattle the day shift workers to me, it's like, oh, must be a Wednesday. I've looked back on this event, and I keep asking myself why I didn't just go back in with my phone's flashlight on, just to be sure we didn't have an intruder or inquisitive guest. But I simply couldn't at the time. I went back to my desk and tried convincing myself that it was absolutely nothing. Which, to be clear, I'm nearly positive it was just that, but it would be one thing if I were the type to jump at my own shadow. But I'm not. This one time, out of nowhere, all my instincts told me I wasn't alone in that kitchen and that I shouldn't push ahead. Needless to say, I used the public guest bathroom for a few weeks, which was a horror story in its own right. Story 39? I was closing a restaurant with one other employee. We were in different parts of the restaurant, and she had earphones in. Something tapped in the window. I looked up and saw nothing. Keep scrubbing the grill or whatever. Again, loud rapping on the window. This happened a few more times. I eventually went to the window and looked out. I got really close, trying to see around the wall. A guy jumped out from against the wall. He was out of sight. Slapped both hands on the window right in front of my face and went, blah! I jumped back and nearly crapped my pants. Then he made that, oh, I ducked up face. He was my coworker's friend. He assumed she would be closing that part of the restaurant. They had an ongoing game where they ducked with each other at work. He was getting her back for calling in an order for something like 25 pizzas 5 minutes before he had to close where he worked. Story 40. Happened a few years ago, so the exact details are a bit hazy. I'm a midwife, and up until a few weeks ago, I used to do shift work on delivery suite and the postnatal ward. One night, it was around 3 a.m. I had to go and take some blood samples to the lab because our pneumatic tube system was down. It's a good 4-minute walk down completely deserted corridors to the other side of the hospital. Some lights are on, but it's generally darker as there is obviously no light coming in from outside. I dropped off the bloods and started walking back when I noticed a woman in a hospital gown with bare feet staring out the window. I'd estimate to be in her 80s. Quite short, with hardly any hair, white and wispy. I stopped to ask her if she was okay and if she was lost. I don't remember if she replied, but I remember she generally had a vacant expression. I went into the ward she was next to get a nurse to come help me. I remember feeling pretty cross that she'd managed to leave the ward. It wasn't safe. Found a nurse and told her that there was a woman outside in a nightgown. When I turned round, this woman had disappeared. I had no clue how she had managed this, as it was a really long corridor without any space for her to hide. No corners to walk around. Obviously, this was quite concerning, so the nurse asked me to describe her so that we could get security involved. When I did, I will never forget this nurse's completely shocked face. Like she didn't quite believe me at the same time as being horrified. I could tell she was trying to work out if I was making a really bizarre joke. She told me she knew who I was talking about. That was one of her patients. The only issue was that she had actually passed that morning. We got security to do a sweep of the building just in case it was a different woman. And they checked the security cameras and never saw her. They saw me stop outside the ward, wait there for a while, and then walk into the ward, and there was never anyone in the corridor with me. I'm 100% sure I saw someone there. And what are the chances I hallucinated someone with the exact description of someone who had passed that morning? Convinced I saw a spirit trying to find her way out. Story 41? So, I'm a gravedigger. I work for a private Freemason cemetery. We have a small crew, so from time to time we have to put a board over a fresh cremation grave until we can get to filling it in. Last July, we have had a really busy day. I ended up needing to finish filling in a cremation hole at about 9:30 p.m. I tell the rest of the guys to go home. I'll handle it. Filling in a cremation usually takes less than 5 minutes. So I jump into the ATV and head out to the marker. I get there and nothing is up. When you bury people for a living, ghost stories really don't bother you anymore. I pull back the board covering the hole and grab my shovel. I turned around to come face to face with the creepiest old man I've ever seen. He has no hair, looks about 80, about the same in weight, his eyes red from crying. He reaches out and puts a hand on my shoulder and basically collapses into me. The person we were burying was his wife. He had stayed at the cemetery most of the evening waiting for someone to come tend to his wife's grave. After consoling the man for a few minutes, he asks me if he can fill in his wife's grave. Keep in mind, the graves are only about 3 feet deep for a cremation, but one. He was old too. Company policy doesn't let anyone but staff conduct burials. The ATV I'm riding has a trailer with all the dirt and sod in it. Nothing too bad, and for some reason I felt like something really terrible was going to happen if I didn't let him do this. So I handed him a shovel, took the keys from the ATV, and told him I could give him 10 minutes. But after that, he'd have to head home. I was shutting up for the night. I then proceeded to take a walk and have a smoke to give the man some privacy. I came back about 15 minutes later, and the grave was completely filled, including the sod being placed back in the ground. I have no idea how the man left without me seeing him. It's a gated cemetery with one entrance that I was walking towards while I gave this guy his moment. Anyways, not super scary, but I do make it a point to make sure all holes are filled before we all head out for the night. Story 42. About 8 years ago, I used to work in the UK, and I loved every aspect of the job except when I had to get the dry food from the lower storage space. The reason for this is because during my induction, we were told that obvious newbie horror story to try and freak out the new employees and that there was a ghost that haunts the cellar. I thought, that's the most cliche thing you could say right now, and just carried on with the induction. It wasn't until 7 months into the job that I went down to the cellar to get some stock. I had been down plenty of times before, but this time it was different. It was going to take me about 20-30 minutes to get all this stock scanned and boxed into the storage lift, so I placed my phone on a shelf and stuck some music on. As I was partway through the stock, something moved out of the corner of my eye further up the cellar. I thought it was nothing, and besides, there's automatic light sensors, so it couldn't have been anything. The lights at the back turned on, so, a little freaked out, I thought something must have fallen. I don't believe in ghosts or paranormal stuff, so I quickly got over the little bit of fear. That was until the light went out, as the timer on the sensor timed out, and the light closer to me down the little hallway turned on. I thought this might have been myself that triggered it, but it was quite a fair bit away, so I couldn't have. So like in all horror films, I went to check. All the lights came on as I walked down further into the cellar. This is where they kept unused mannequins for their clothing displays, and I picked up a loose mannequin arm and jokingly said, "I'm armed," because in situations like this, I'm rather silly. The lights from where I was picking stock turned off, and so did my music. So I freaked out and used the back service elevator to go up to the chilled foods section and told my manager. She thought I was lying at first until several days later, the line manager reported some weird noises and happenings in the cellar. Nothing ever came of it, but it's still very weird to this day. And for those wondering, yes, I got my phone back, albeit with the help of the ex-Army employee. Story 43. Hey all, CNA who specializes in dementia here. I work in my town's nursing home, part of Trinity Health if anyone is curious. When I first got hired by my nursing home, the aides and nurses on my dementia unit told me creepy stories about strange things that happened, doors slamming and lights turning on and off. I didn't exactly believe them, and I just thought they were entertaining stories until one night. It was my usual from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift, and it was just me and another nurse. I was busy charting on the patients. I was taken care of and decided to take a break from staring at the monitor to stare at my phone. At this point, it's like 2 a.m. and my nurse went on breakout to her car to take a nap. I was left to ensure the patients were okay. Now, understand none of my patients walk and are all wheelchair bound. So if they need to get out of bed, I would help them, and at 2 a.m., no one is really awake. I go out to the massive dining room to get a ginger ale, and as I was walking back to the nurse's station, I heard something fall, and of course I said, "Aw, damn. Now I gotta go pick that up." As I go to turn around, I see something run towards the oven out of view. Our dining room is an upside-down L shape. Of course, like any sane man would I go, "Nurse's name, is that you? Are you throwing crap?" No response. If you and I are playing a game, you really need to work on your aim. And no crap, the dining room's radio kicks on and starts playing Frank Sinatra's "Fly Me to the Moon." I turned off the radio and called my supervisor to see if she was damn with me. She was busy up on the other units, so I was the only staff on my unit at the time. A quick head count revealed everyone was in their beds. I don't go into that dining room in the dark now, and I most certainly leave most of the lights on. Story 44. At one of my previous sysadmin jobs, we were closing down one of our smaller data centers as it was being consolidated into one of out larger ones. But we still had to have at least one person there in case of server issues that had to be dealt with on site. We rotated each week on which one of us would do the overnights there. The place was reportedly haunted, by what I have no idea. Just heard rumors from other coworkers when I hired in. So imagine a relatively large open office space that is completely void of all the cubicles, desks, etc. that are normally there, with just one desk and a few random cables hanging from the ceiling. Also, just the lights over my desk were working and bleeding out into my surroundings by about 3 feet. That was where I was for the week. I remember sitting there and just hearing ambient noise from the sort of far-off server room, fans, cooling system, etc., working on a server for a customer of ours, and seeing something dart across the room in my peripheral vision. I looked up and didn't see anything, so figured my eyes were just tired from the screen light and making me see like those floaties when your eyes close too tightly. Went back to work, and then about 5 minutes later I saw it again, although this time I heard the bathroom door open and shut. Big-ass heavy door you pulled open, and the mechanism at top of door pulled it shut. Thought maybe one of my coworkers was here for a server fix, so got up and went to greet them and wait for them. About 10 minutes pass, and no one comes out the bathroom. I go in to make sure they're not passed out or hurt. One of my coworkers suffered from seizures. But lo and behold, empty bathroom. Now I'm creeped out. Leave the bathroom, and this time see the shadow person thing on the other side of the room dart across again, but looking at it straight on and not from my peripheral vision. Quickly went over and threw the rest of the lights on and started searching the whole office and server room for a coworker. As I was 100% sure they were damn with me, never found anyone. Rest of the night was uneventful, as well as the rest of the week. Minus me, basically crafting bricks sitting at my desk waiting for something else to happen. Story 45? Worked overnight at Walgreens for a few years. My manager noticed some banging types of noises coming from the stockroom in the back of the store. I go on lunch at like 3 a.m. I come back and cover the front register while the cashier goes on lunch. Before I do, though, I notice like 10 cop cars on the security camera in the manager's office. I go to cover the front register and a cop with a police dog, all dusty cone, running up towards the front of the store. Apparently 2 guys were using like handsaws and crap and were trying to break into the T-Mobile next door and miscalculated. They got a small hole through before they ran due to the cops coming. I think they caught one guy, another guy escaped. My manager had to give testimony at the trial like over a year later. Not exactly creepy, but definitely rememberable. Story 46. Used to work security in a landfill with my only companion being a dog that lives there. My job was basically to make sure no one sneaks in to take scrap metal. It was an easy, laid-back job, especially since it was in the middle of nowhere. One night, I'm doing my rounds when I see the dogs there looking down the road, and I see a guy just walking towards the landfill, and I start walking towards him and notice he looks pretty beat up, like if he got jumped or something. He passes by a tall bush that was in the road, and I wait for him to step out, but he never does so. I shine my light towards the bush, but nothing. I wait there for about 2 minutes and nothing. So I decide to get close, and the dog I mentioned starts following me. We get close, and I pull out my baton just in case, and no one is behind the bush, as if this guy just walked and disappeared. I look down the road and don't see anyone. After a few hours, the next shift punches in. And I tell her that I saw this guy, and she interrupts me and asks if he looked beat up with a red ripped shirt and barefoot. After I confirmed that she described him exact even his hair, she told me that the man I saw pass a couple years ago walking in that same road and was hit and dragged by a car that was rushing out of the landfill and left his body behind that bush. I didn't believe her since she was a prankster, but it made me think, and I still don't have an explanation on who that guy was or where he went to. Story 47. Working as a service advisor at a truck stop, had an escort come in crying. She left. 10 minutes later, a trucker comes in wondering where said escort was. I don't know. Not like I tell him anyways. Truck stops are interesting, to say the least, especially graveyard shifts. Story 48. I worked in an airport as ground ops, and we'd always have shifts dragged to 3:30 a.m. to wait for arriving planes. Whatever, used to it. But when I first joined one time, I ended up at the end of the airport, this end used to be part of a forest, and was sitting there quietly. Heard the doors slam shut behind me, but there was no one. Felt cold all of a sudden and decided to let it be without informing my officer. A few days later, a friend, A, saw another friend, B, walking past him. A said hello and B just nodded, walking away. I then realized that B isn't on shift at the moment. He called another friend who was B's housemate and was informed that B was at home sleeping. That was when I realized this part of the airport had its own stories. After a few months of working there, someone told me he was video calling his 4-year-old son at where I sat at 11 p.m. alone, and his screen froze. He went back home only to have his wife tell him that when it froze. They both saw a woman standing behind him, and his son asked who that was. Fast forward another few weeks, and my friend was opening an arrival at 4 a.m. when she turned and saw some old man smiling creepily at her at the boarding gate behind where she was. There were no departing flights at that time, and security does not allow passengers to be at the gate between 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. I talked about all these to my friend who was a ramp agent, and he pointed across the runway. We could see it well, and that's when I saw a bunch of wooden crosses that are apparently graveyards there. Story 49. Security guard as well. I was working as a midnight shift mobile supervisor for a local security company. Our job was to check on guards stationed at various sites in the city, perform mobile patrols of properties for some clients, and answer alarms to confirm if police response was required. There were 2 of us, one on the east side of the city and myself on the west. I got a call from the other supervisor and she asked me to do an alarm check in her area, as she was scared to do it. It was a funeral home, where they do cremations on site. I am not superstitious and was often asked to do the alarms at funeral homes or other creepy places for others. I arrived on site and called the alarm company to ask which alarms had specifically gone off. She only said internal motion alarm. I asked which door access was tripped and she said, none, just internal motion. Not going to lie, that triggered the spine-tingling creepy vibe. I entered the building and started to head up the stairs, and that was when I heard a noise downstairs. Flashlight in hand, no guns, this is in Canada. I crept down the stairs and started moving slowly around corners and watching for any movement. Going around the last corner, in a room at the back of the basement, something black jumped out at my face, and I did not scream in a manly fashion. Turned out to be a black cat. It seemed to have got in through a window that was left open on the first floor. I still get the odd jump scare nightmare about it. Story 50. I was painting an elevator shaft in an historic building downtown, but due to the fact that the other workers were there during the day to work on the mechanics, I worked alone at night. The entire 4-story building is being painted, so the floors are covered in crinkly D cloth. I'm on the 3rd one night in shaft painting in perfect silence when I hear the unmistakable sound of footsteps crinkling across the 1st-story floor. No one has access to the building but me, and I did not hear the door code buzz to open even if they did. I hold my breath and get out of sight. The activity continues and my mouth is dry as I call my roommate. I realize that for the past month, I've been showing up to the same location alone at the same time, and am a petite woman in a well-lit empty home full of windows facing a darker corner of downtown. This is the serial killer checklist, and those footsteps have reached the uncovered stairs and stopped. I whisper the code to roommate and grab a piece of plywood the carpenters left behind and cram myself into a corner and wait. The next 2 minutes are completely quiet until I hear the buzzing of the door and my roommate loudly announcing his entrance. I run out of my hiding spot and explain everything as I, with renewed confidence, search the 1st floor. All I had time to tell him was, "Come here now," and address. It slowly connects for him, and he wisely suggests we don't go looking for whoever might be there and just leave. The next day, I show up during the day, because a paycheck is a paycheck, and mention that I'm more comfortable with this arrangement to the confused mechanic. Then he asks if anything weird happened on the 3rd floor. He laughed when I didn't answer and says that the guys sometimes feel someone tapping on their shoulder, but there's no one there. I've never finished a job so quickly. Damn that place. Story 51? Not really night shift, but it happened at 3 a.m., so it should suffice. I used to work at a private resort in Bali. If you know Bali, well, that island is really magical, as if every inch of the land is permeated with both something creepy and something calming, in perfect balance. So one day, I had to go to work at 3 a.m. because there was a guest who wanted to do sunrise fishing tour, and he wanted me to be the guide. I came to my office to change clothes and put my bag. Now, this office building is located separate from the resorts. We had to walk for about 300 meters from the lobby, through a cobblestone path flanked by big old trees and past the resort's big Hindu temple. The building was 2-story, and the long corridor was overlooking the vast land which the management let be, filled with trees, because the resort was built upon Tanah Adat, and parts of it had to be empty. At 3 a.m., it was really dark, and nobody was there. Only a single security guard who was stationed near the parking lot, and definitely not in the building. I clocked in the fingerprint machine that happened to be located next to my office front door and got into my chair. As soon as I sat down, I heard the machine saying, "Repeat again! Repeat again!" which happened when someone whose fingerprint is not recorded in try to clock in. It didn't stop after a minute, so I got curious and opened the door. Silence. Nobody was there, only darkness and the swaying of leaves. I closed the door again, but the same thing repeated. As soon as I put my butt on my chair, the machine screamed, "Repeat again! Repeat again!" After the third time, I was both scared and annoyed. So I opened the door loudly and shouted, "Stop playing around! I'm trying to work here!" No more disturbance happened until the time to go. I refused to have another sunrise tour after that. Story 52. I used to have to stay until the last movie ended at the movie theater. It was usually just me, and maybe a friend would come to hang out for the night. We heard they recently put an alarm on the hatch going to the roof. But if you open and close it before 15 seconds, the door pagers won't go off. So in classic teenager fashion, we had an urge to get on the roof. We ended up getting on the roof with no issues, and we're just chilling and looking around. As we are about to head back to the hatch, I get a call. It's the movie theater's number, but my friend and I were the only ones there. I answer, and it turns out it's my manager screaming at me asking if I'm on the roof. I hang up and run down to the lobby. There's my manager and 2 cops waiting there for me. I guess when they set the alarm for the office, safe area, it goes off when you open the roof hatch. It was my birthday that day, and the cops basically wished me a happy birthday and left. Never got fired for it, but had my adrenaline pumping. Story 53. I worked third shift at a hospital in the supply department with a morgue across the hall. I heard the housekeeping supervisor tell this guy named Gene to clean the morgue. I could see Gene blanch. I casually walked back into my department, then ran to the back, through the freight elevator, doors on both sides, and down another little hall and into the morgue. I turned off the light and stood against the wall with my hand backed onto the switch. 3 or 4 minutes later, the door creaked open slowly, and a hand reached in to find the switch. I closed my fingers over Gene's and heard an "ah!" and his feet pounding away down the hall. I walked out and down the hall, and he was leaned over trying to get his breath back. He swore vengeance, but never did take it. I was the creepy thing that night. Story 54. I used to work in a 24-hour coffee shop. I'm usually on night shifts. When I was a new trainee, I had been told there's this customer that will come in late around 2:30 a.m. for a quad shot espresso. The lady who trained me also implied to just serve him his shots and avoid conversations. The first shift, I was introduced to the customer casually as the new replacement. At first glance, he was sort of an oddball with a very menacing face. After the formal introduction, we didn't really talk much. Then, I made a mistake. I tried to have a friendly conversation with him. He began talking about many things that's very private and heavy in his life. It went from his divorced wife to his child's accidental death. I couldn't take it anymore. So I had to abruptly end the hour-long unprofessional consoling I did. These nights went on, but I could still handle it with good mental. I suggested seek professional help and therapy. He said he is already going through therapy. One night, the night that made me decide to quit the job for good, the customer came in and ordered his shots as usual. Suddenly, out of nowhere, he completely broke down and started sobbing uncontrollably. He just sat in one of the tables and cried for nearly half an hour. I just left him a tissue box and went on cleaning. After the meltdown, he stared me down for like another half hour looking angry and confused. Then he ordered another quad shot and left. That night was surreal. At one second, I thought I had to defend for myself and call the cops. Then I felt bad for the guy of all the traumatic experiences. Regardless of whatever it was, I couldn't take it anymore. I was already stressed at the time, but absorbing all these negativity takes a huge toll out of my mental health each night. So then, I just called it in and looked for another job. Story 55. I was a security guard at a theme park. I worked nights for a few years there. My partner and I used to get creeped out quite a bit, usually by animals moving in bushes or popping out of trash cans when you got near them. The creepiest event for me was during one of our rounds around the park, checking in at locations with a watchman device. The key I had to hit was in the ride operator's booth, and the fastest access was driving up from the parking lot, popping open a gate, going up a couple flights of stairs to the platform. For years I did this. You get to the top, take a look around, cross the tracks to the booth, hit the key, and leave. Well, there was an elevator for wheelchair access directly across from the top of the stairs. I always gave it an extra look, expecting the thing from a horror movie to come out of it, but nothing ever did. Only one time I got to the top of the stairs and the damn thing dinged and opened. I was frozen watching the doors open. Nothing came out, but my mind raced as it happened, and I kept expecting a wave of gribble to come out. It was just broken and nobody had warned us. I told my partner about it and he refused to go up there the next week. I think I skipped going up there a few times also. That was probably the creepiest thing that actually happened. Otherwise, I would jump a lot around Halloween because of stupid mannequins and bushes. You would look directly at it, acknowledge it in your mind, keep walking. Suddenly it's in your peripheral vision and you jump. Like, what the heck, me? We also used to scare each other with a jet black mannequin. We would set it up knowing where the second shift guys would go during their rounds, placing it. So when they turned around or opened a door, a figure would loom out at them. They, of course, returned the favor. Story 56. Long ago, when I was working nights alone at a gas station convenience store, all sorts of sketchy characters would come and go. They were rarely trouble, but one has stuck in my mind for decades. This distraught girl who was maybe 20 at the oldest, wearing some kind of yellow Bruce Lee and Game of Death jumpsuit, came into the store, and she clearly needed help. She was high and confused and scared, and had crap herself, and she wanted to go home. I had no idea what to do. I don't know if they train you for this kind of thing now, but they didn't then. I tried to get some more information out of her, and she said she wanted a cab, so I called her a cab. It didn't even occur to me that she didn't have money, and when the cabbie showed up, he found that out quick and left. She still wanted to go home, and I couldn't exactly take her anywhere. And having worked at a gas station for a little while and gotten humiliatingly scammed by wily cashier scammers before, I wasn't going to pony up my own money, which I wasn't exactly flush with, living the kind of life where one works the late-night convenience store shift. So I offered, in the nicest and most well-intended way I could phrase it, to call some people who I thought should be able to help her out. She asked if I meant the police, and I very gently said, yeah, I think they... And she just ran the duck out. Of course she did. She was high on something, probably for the first time, possibly not something she even took willingly. I'd just given this terrified young woman one more thing to be scared of. This was my first realization that we can't and shouldn't be relying on cops for this mental health crap. Probably should have told her I'd call her an ambulance. So to this day, I have no idea what happened to that girl before or after she came into my store, but it's haunted me a little. Story 57. When I walked past the halls of the call center I worked, I heard keyboard and mouse clicks. There was nobody there. I just shrugged off and kept working. Story 58. I worked in a now long gone discount pharmacy chain. A poor man's Dwayne Reed. The place we had was creepy, any time of day. Normally I worked early morning shift, but I had a huge order on the truck and wanted to be there to make sure it was stored properly. Now I had heard the stories of aisle 11 many times. At least 3 phantom shoppers were supposed to lurk there due to a fatal fire at the location at least a decade prior. I had never seen one, but even customers would come to me claiming to see someone staring at the shelves in a weird way or people smelling smoke and something burning. I would get there and nothing until I waited for the truck. It was after hours, just us chickens. I was waiting up front having coffee when the supply room supervisor announced the truck had arrived. I headed towards the back. As I passed aisle 11, I saw a movement in the corner of my eye. I stopped and went back, and there was a customer squatting down, looking at the bottom shelf, baby bathtubs, like she was trying to memorize them. I stopped and walked over to her asking what she was doing in the store as it had closed hours ago. She rose up and started walking towards me aggressively. I backpedaled, doping my coffee, and turned to run. And I ran right into another supervisor. He had been watching the interaction, but froze in place. He grabbed my arm and we both hightailed it to the back. As I started telling the manager what had just happened, the supervisor interrupted me, saying Disco was back, his face pale as a sheet. She was one of the phantoms of aisle 11. They called her Disco because she wore a dark orange catsuit with flared legs like were popular in the 1970s. She had been known to actually chase people out of the aisle, as she had just done with me. Needless to say, I quit that night. Story 59. I work overnights doing line work for the cable company in a very rural area. Typically, I limit my work to stuff that I can do out of my bucket truck due to not wanting to fall off a ladder or utility pole out in the middle of the woods or a field, which means mostly I work roadside. One night, however, I had to reach a piece of equipment that was off the main road. Thankfully, there was a small pull-off that I was able to get my truck backed into far enough to reach with the boom. Now, this road I was just off of was some backwater that had zero traffic and maybe 5 total houses down its multi-mile length, which is pretty normal for the area. It was about 3 a.m. when I started working and got into the air. Maybe 10 minutes into my troubleshooting, I start hearing noises in the surrounding thick AF woods. These aren't just normal wind noises, mind you, since I could hear them over the sound of my truck and hydraulic pump running. I thought it may have just been deer at first, until I heard branches start to snap. I turned off my truck and start looking around with a spotlight. Mind you, I'm about 25 feet in the air with no real way for something to get to me. I finally find where the undergrowth is moving and focus in to see a black bear walking up to the back of my truck. I started my truck back up, hoping the noise would scare it off, but to no success, shouting at the bear doesn't even seem to register. I ended up sitting in the air for another 25 minutes or so, waiting for the bear to get bored and wander back off into the woods, before I boomed down and sprinted to the cab of my truck and got TF out of there.